All right, good people. I am here with Dr. Ken Johnson, a Gullah boy out of Charleston, South Carolina, and it's interesting that I have found him all the way here to in the beautiful island of Jamaica. We attended an event together here in Jamaica. So he's Gullah and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I said, you know what, I gotta ask him the questions because I'm always in the Low Country.
That's right.
So I wanted to ask you, brother, with the change that's happening in Charleston right now, and as well as the South, how is the Charleston today different from the Charleston when you were there growing up?
I grew up in the city of Charleston, and as far as the Gullah Geechee culture is concerned, we are now not one thing. Just like black folks are not one thing, we are global indigenous people. And so the Gullah Geechee, for the lack of a better term, the Gullah Geechee culture is kind of ubiquitous in the Low Country area. Now, right now, it's pretty much a concentrated group of people. But back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s when I was growing up, it was the whole city. You could not be there without being a part of it. And so, in that regard, it was total immersion. But for right now, just like everything else, it becomes more compartmentalized. And as with most things that happen in society and cities, it happens in concentric circles. First of all, we inhabit the inner cities, and then we start moving out to the suburbs. And then there's gentrification, so they come back. So generally it happens when the enslavers capture or colonize a group of people. They put them in a certain location. In Charleston at that particular time, more black people were living in the city than not.
Right.
And there were some on the farms, and like we would always call it going across the bridge. It was the large Cooper River Bridge at that time, the 1,000-foot structure that was there, 2-lane highway.
Yeah.
But as a group of people, we were all pretty much involved in the Gullah Geechee culture. My mom was a cook, and so we were talking about the slave market the other night, and she had she worked for a guy who owned a little shop, a little restaurant in the slave market, and that's where the workers would come from the stalls and eat. Mm-hmm. So that whole market was never inhabited by white people at all.
And real quick, not to interrupt, but to interrupt, we also talked about how you have the Daughters of the Revolution. It's engraved there at the market,
right?
And you gave a very interesting perspective on how you have that symbol or that verbiage up there, but inside the market was all Africa. It was all Gullah Geechee African American, right?
Exactly,
all of
right.
Africa, right?
All of Africa.
So the irony of that, right?
That's right. It's pretty all of Africa. Now, it's like I said, we're not all one thing anyway.
It's not monolithic.
No one thing anyway. And so all of the people, all of the stalls in the far end of the market toward the ocean were generally food, sweetgrass baskets, utilitarian items that people came to buy. To near the front of the market were the shops and the restaurants and things of that nature. So it was a kind of separation, but everybody was immersed in the culture. You could not be in Charleston and not speak Gullah. It's just you could not do that. It just didn't happen. When I was from my age, 40s, 50s, 60s, we still had carts that went around selling vegetables. We still had people pushing carts with flambeaux at night. I don't know if you know what a flambeau is. A flambeau is it's another one of those terms that is Gullah Geechee. Flambeau is a can with a kerosene rag in it that's lit for light. And so you have a wooden cart with vegetables or whatever wares he was selling. And he'd be pushing the cart down the street, selling whatever wares he had. At that time also, there were horses in town. People had horses and carriages in town. So it was not a quote unquote developed area. Now I grew up in Charleston City, and there's a different kind of culture in the city as there is in the rural area, as there is right now.
Sure, sure. What were the different dynamics?
The different dynamic was the people on the islands, and we, across the bridge,
Yeah.
east of the Cooper, west of the Ashley, they had farms, or they had patches of land that they farmed, and so they had pigs and cows and chickens, and they fed themselves. People in the city lived off of domestic work, or like I say, cooks, maids, or whatever, and they bought food. But it was also, if you had a patch of land, you grew your food. And so that was pretty much the urban rural difference.
Okay.
And the rural areas was really, really rural, because no running water other than pump well, outhouses, that kind of thing. But you have to remember the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when we talk about Gullah Geechee, because some individuals may not actually understand or know what Gullah Geechee is, so can you explain to us what Gullah Geechee means?
Well, I can only explain what it means. What it means to me.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can only explain what it means to me, because Gullah Geechee to me is a cultural identity. I guess you have given a part of the history of the South Sea Islands, and after reconstructions, they were given to quote unquote the black folks in the area, and they kind of kept their particular culture alive. But that culture is not necessarily a total African culture. It is a mixture. I think you and I were having that discussion about the DNA of blacks coming across, and how it changed our DNA.
Absolutely.
So we were at a particular point not really African and not really American. And I don't really think of us as any particular race, since my own impression that we are global indigenous people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you find an African presence
everywhere,
in the entire world. So we are not a race; we are the race. And so, in that regard, Gullah Geechee is not one monolithic thing, but it is a portion of the greater whole.
Yeah.
And as you know, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Absolutely.
Right.
We were talking about how a lot of Gullah Geechee folks were separated from the mainland, specifically in Beaufort.
Right.
I think it was in the 60s when the bridge finally connected the island folks to places,
to the city.
Access to the city, right?
Right.
So you gave a very interesting perspective on that last night, on how it was good and bad to a certain degree.
It's a double-edged sword, as I always said, because being cut off from the mainland, you're able to kind of keep your culture, but it also kind of negates any growth outside of that comfort zone.
Yeah.
And the good thing is we still have a Gullah Geechee culture. The other part of that is we have been able to expand our culture. So without that road out, there would have been no expansion of the culture. But as I said, as we first started, it seems like everything happens in compartments.
Yeah.
Because outside of the Low Country, do you see the Gullah Geechee culture?
Yeah.
We are here.
Yeah.
We are there. You met me here in Jamaica.
Yeah.
I live in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I'm Gullah Geechee.
Yeah.
And my brother lives in New York. Been living there over 50 years, have never lost his accent. So we are everywhere.
Yeah.
It goes back to that global indigenous people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we talk about food, right?
Yeah.
Give us the rundown on a typical meal in a Gullah Geechee home.
For us, since we were po folk,
right.
assets were not available.
Right.
So there were, and like I say, I always give it only from my perspective.
Sure.
From what I saw. 7 of us, 1 mother, no father. What I call now big pot culture is that there's always a pot of rice on the stove, but everything else is in a big pot. Either beans, peas, cow peas, snow peas, okra soup. Some of the things that people would not relate to, like what I call okra soup, you may call okra gumbo. It's could be corn, tomatoes, okra, maybe some meat, oxtail, pigtail, chicken feet. Yeah, chickens actually do have feet.
Oh yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
we actually ate them. And that kind of thing. So there were 7 of us to feed. You could go to the store and buy 25 cents worth of bologna and get a lot of bologna. When I grew up, sodas were like 6 cents.
Mm-hmm.
We could get cookies 2 for a penny. We call them wagon wheels.
Mm.
Yeah, with no sugar on top. 10 cents, you had a meal.
Yeah,
that
it
was
good.
That was lunch. But the whole food revolved around the planting and harvesting.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and the kinds of things that we would eat would be like what they eat here on the island, like what we would eat back in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and also what the slaves were given. It's like somebody else got the greens, we got the turnips.
Yeah.
Or somebody else got the ham, and we got the chitlins and the ears and the feet.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole process of cooking and making do is what the Gullah Geechee culture is. We wanted shrimp, we went throw the net.
Yeah.
We wanted fish, we went fishing.
It was
we wanted
and it was readily available.
We were there.
Yeah.
Right, we were there. Even in the city, because there wasn't that much development.
Yeah. So as far as the language,
Okay.
can you give us an example? Can you say something that's germane to the Gullah Geechee language?
Hannah, if I ask me to talk to you about things, and he ready to talk to you about nothing, man. Hannah, the expression for you, it, him, or whatever is one of the common expression.
Okay.
Another thing, like I spoke to you about the games that you play.
Yeah.
Like little Sally Walker sitting in the salsa. Well, most Americans say, well, rise, Sally, rise, wipe your weeping eyes, put your hands on your hip. We used to say, put your hands on your Kimbo, let your backbone shake. Another thing, you know, a common term for, quote unquote, the white man was cracker.
Yeah.
We use the term buckra.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because he knew about cracker, but he didn't know about buckra.
Okay. was that a term to kind of code? Was that like a code?
It was kind of code.
Yeah.
And a lot of the language comes from African dialects,
Mm-hmm.
English, and kind of pidgin. Most indigenous groups have a pidgin language. In Hawaii, they kind of have a pidgin language as well. And so it's kind of that kind of mismatch.
Yeah.
But it is a separate language because there are terms and quote unquote like rules, you know, just like rules of any language.
Absolutely.
Yeah, tenses, dropping, you know, letters and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You had mentioned, well, we had talked about the importance of, you were mentioning that you had a colleague that had gone around to all these different places in which slavery was woven into the fabric of their culture and
Right.
the countries or
Right.
the islands, right?
Mhm.
But we also talked about the importance of Charleston.
Yeah.
To take that, you have to take that has to be a stop along the journey, right?
It
because
has-
Charleston is a direct route to Africa.
It has to be because what it was, I was at a lecture and she was talking about all the slave forts. As a matter of fact, she'd gone to most of the slave forts, but she hadn't gone to Charleston. And we had a conversation afterwards because you and I were talking about it last night. If you look at the structure of the dock in Charleston in relation to the slave market, less than 2 blocks away.
It's right there.
The ocean is here.
Yep.
You wash them here. You march them dead into the market. And so that whole architecture is built around. And there are so many places in Charleston that the slave culture inhabited, and you can't miss that as a stop. You just can't miss
Yeah,
that as a stop.
it's imperative, right? And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of people, when they do think Gullah folk, they only think Charleston, but it's we're talking about the top of North Carolina on the coast, all the way down to Jacksonville,
all the way down,
Florida,
all the way down to
right?
Florida, all the way
Yeah.
down, all the way down to Florida. It's not just the South Sea Islands.
Yeah.
Nah, but it runs that whole, and anywhere that we stopped, I always tell our brothers and sisters that the only difference between a Jamaican, a Dominican, an African American, a Cuban is a boat stop.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it. We are all the same people. Anywhere in the world you can go and find black folk.
Absolutely.
Pushkin.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the poet laureate of Russia. It's a black man, Pushkin. So it's just a matter of where we are, and how you look for us and how you find us.
How did you all, as far as if you did travel or anything back then, did you purposely seek out other Gullah Geechee people along the routes? Like, let's just say that you all were going to Savannah,
Yeah.
or if you were going to Jacksonville, Florida for a family vacation or anything like that. Would you all purposely seek out individuals
Well,
of
like I
Gullah
say,
descent? Or?
when I was growing up, you could not escape it. It was everywhere. So we didn't have to go looking. There are certain places we could not go. Now, you could travel anywhere along Highway 17 or one of the other highways before the major highway came along, and there would be sweetgrass basket stands almost every other block.
Those were your indicators.
Yeah, and we could only go certain places anyway.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to look for other Gullah Geechee people. We were there.
So a lot of, well, I know by looking at him, you don't know, but he's 71, right? So you couldn't tell this brother's 71, right? Living on these different islands has been good to this brother, right? It is ironic that I met him on an island. So you grew up during the time of Jim Crow.
Right.
Tell us what Jim Crow was like in a dominated town that was surrounded or that was populated by black folks.
The thing was with Charleston at that particular period of time, from my perspective growing up as a little kid, from a little kid above, the first thing happens is that your parents teaches you how to survive. There's certain things you do and certain things you do not do. Now, when I was growing up, since my mother worked in, like you would call, food service industry, we had access to things that a lot of people didn't, in that you'd have to go places to get groceries and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we always had to go in the back doors. When we walked down the street, I never had experienced having to step off the sidewalk. But you knew you did not go certain places and you had to behave a certain way.
Rules of engagement.
Exactly. And you were taught that from an early age. Now, back in the late 40s, early 50s, it was hardcore segregation. Hardcore segregation, so that I didn't have much experience outside of my community. Really, it was like block to block. We had a corner store here and a corner store in that block, and we had places like Back to Green. That's another term, which was a housing project right down by the road, by the ocean, or up the road, which was like in Dorchester area, or Overtown, which was like on East Bay Street. All of those areas were where black folks lived. Rutledge Avenue, it runs through Charleston, was pretty much where all the white folks lived. Rutledge Avenue, Ashley Avenue, through gentrification now, we're not there anymore. I went back not too long ago, and I was just amazed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're baffled.
Yeah, because if there were places you did not go, like Do What You Choose Alley, you didn't, as a black person, you didn't go to Do What You Choose Alley.
Right.
Just the name itself.
It wasn't meant for you to do what you choose.
Do what you choose. So you didn't go to Do What You Choose Alley. Then now they live in Do What You Choose
Yeah.
Alley. I'm going like, how could this be?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but it's what happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So to close us out, my question is, give us what has allowed the Gullah Geechee people to be so resilient. It's such a special culture.
Yeah.
That you and I have also talked about. That's really everywhere.
That's right. Yeah.
Even with just quote unquote common black folks.
Right, yeah.
There's traits of it. You
Yeah,
know, it was just
right.
we were sold off. I think if my memory serves me correctly, about 60% of the African Americans in this country came through the area, right? The low country area. So obviously there's still some remnants of what it is that we do inland that are directly related to Gullah Geechee culture. But what makes it so special? What makes it so special for you to be in Hawaii telling people that you're a Gullah boy, for you to be here in Jamaica telling people that you're a Gullah? What has been instilled and ingrained in you mentally to still hold that badge of honor?
The thing is, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We really do. We are the best of the best of the best that was taken from Africa. Because those that did not make it, did not survive. Not that they weren't strong, but out of that's where we come from. You cannot stop us as a people.
Yeah.
there is nothing that you can do to stop black people. We are going to be here. We've been here since the beginning of time. We'll be here when everything else is over. As I said before, we are the race. Yeah, race is a social construct.
Absolutely.
I don't want to go get off subject.
We can go down the rabbit hole with that one.
Do want to go down the rabbit hole.
Or the weasel hole. There's plenty of weasel holes out here in Jamaica.
Yeah, race is a social construct. So for me as a Gullah Geechee boy, you just as Gullah as I am.
Yeah,
you
man.
just don't know it. Yeah. And it's not I have to teach you. I just have to help you tap in so you can remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I greatly appreciate you taking about 20 minutes out of your day. You know, we've been kicking it and talking. So I said, you know, I got to get Dr. Johnson on camera. So I greatly appreciate it, brother.
No worries.
All right.